Hi guys. This is like take 7 or 8 at this point, but I'm trying to get my ideas into as short a video as possible. So I wanted to come to you guys today and talk to you about fasting because I feel like the Lord has asked me to embark on a 7-day fasting period. And I've invited some of you guys, anyone who really wants to join in, to fast with me for the next 7 days, starting tomorrow morning and going all the way until Friday night, and then we're gonna break bread together and share communion before the 6:30 session of the Kingdom Come event at my church. And what we're asking the Lord for is both to prepare our hearts, ours individually and the church as a whole, for what Dr. Morphew is going to be coming to teach, and just that any warfare that the enemy throws at us would be stopped in its tracks. But I did want to talk to you about fasting because I've only really started learning about fasting in the last 3 or 4 years, because I grew up in the church, but I didn't have great education on what fasting was and why we did it. And I think maybe that's not a unique experience to me, but I've learned a little bit, partly through the wisdom of others and partly through trial and error, and I wanted to share with you guys. So what is fasting? What is the point of it? There's a lot of really great ways to explain that, but the way that makes the most sense to me is if you've ever done an activation, like if you've taken SOCM or if you've been at a church that does activations, what those are is you're basically taking an element of the faith, prayer or prophecy or something of that nature, and you're practicing it in a controlled way so that when you get out into the world, kind of in the wild, so to speak, and you get an opportunity to do that same thing with people who maybe aren't believers or in situations that aren't as controlled, you kind of already have that muscle memory. You have that experience to draw on. And it's not so weird and it's not so scary because you've already done it. And so I like to think of fasting as an activation in obedience, if that makes sense. The way that you typically do a fast, the classic way, of course, is to abstain from food, but really anything that you have an impulse towards. People will often fast from, for example, sugar or caffeine or social media or video games. Anything that you're going to have an impulse toward, that when that impulse arises, you can take that impulse as a cue to train your brain. No, I'm going to deny myself in this moment, and I'm going to choose God instead. So if you're doing, for example, a social media fast, your finger kind of hovers towards where that Facebook icon is on your phone screen, and instead of opening, like you catch yourself and you go, or maybe you just move it. That's really the wiser thing to do. Move it away. So you go to click over, open Facebook, realize the icon's missing, and go, oh right, I'm fasting. Instead of doing Facebook and scrolling, I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to read my Bible, or I'm going to pray, and I'm going to choose God in this moment. I'm going to deny myself, and I'm going to choose the Lord. Same thing if you're doing a classic fast or a Daniel fast or sugar fast. Anytime you have that craving, instead of indulging in that craving, you take that moment to read your Bible or pray or worship or whatever it is. And it's just an activation in obedience. So that's what it is. And I actually have had a kind of hard road learning to fast the past few years. My first several, I would get partway through and fail, and then I finally got to where I was succeeding in them, and then I had another really bad failure last year, and that was for a different reason. So the reason my early ones failed is because the enemy would hit me with this like 1-2 punch of, he'd introduce ambiguity, or confusion, and then he'd hit me with shame. And so, for example, if I was doing a social media fast, one of my friends, because I wasn't sharing that I was doing a social media fast broadly, because you don't do that, right? You don't blast it from the housetops. You go about your normal life. Sent me a YouTube link that was a worship video, and so the enemy hit me with, is this really social media though? It's just listening to a song, and it's a worship song. Is this allowed? Like, this is probably allowed. This is probably fine. And because I had been very ambiguous in what I was setting out to do, I was like, yeah, that's probably fine. And so I listened to it, but I wasn't strong in that conviction that, yes, this is allowed. And so as soon as I listened to it, the enemy hits me with that shame of like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. And you might as well just quit because you've already broken your fast. What's the point now? And then I would quit. And I did that for the first 3 or 4 times. So my advice would be twofold. First, get rid of as much ambiguity on the front end as you can. So instead of saying, I'm going to fast from social media, say, I'm not going to open these apps. I'm not going to open Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and write it down somewhere so that if you get hit with that temptation, you have it written down. And the second thing is if the enemy tries to hit you with something that maybe is a gray area that you didn't think to write down ahead of time, well, this is a great moment to practice stopping and asking the Lord in the moment. And if you don't get a clear answer, then assume the answer is no. But if he gives you peace about it, then the answer is yes. So that would be my advice there. Just to eliminate ambiguity so the enemy can't hit you with confusion. And then if you do have a moment where you have to make a decision, turn to God and ask him. And then the other pitfall, which was honestly a lot more embarrassing, and happened more recently, was really more of a pride pitfall. I had the Lord had asked me to do a period of fasting, and it was a set number of days. I'm not going to say how many, but I had done this number of days of fasting before, but I had done it as a classic fast, only water and herbal tea, no caffeine, no calories, for this set number of days. So I had done that. I had succeeded. It had gone really well because I knew that the Lord had asked me to do it, and I made it through, and I felt wonderful at the end of it. And so he tells me again, I want you to fast for this number of days. But I felt like he was not calling me to a classic fast that second time. He was calling me, and this was several months later, so it wasn't like 2 in a row. But I felt like he was calling me to fast from social media that time because I admittedly have kind of a problem with TikTok. But in my pride, I was like, but a social media fast, that's easy mode. Is that really enough of a challenge? And so I decided I was going to do both. I was going to do a classic fast and a social media fast and challenge myself. Which, you ever look back at something and it made sense in the moment, but you look back and you're like, man, I was dumb. That was dumb. That's how I feel about this. So I was clearly trying to do it in my own strength. I was not listening to the Lord and doing what he was telling me to do. I was stepping out in pride, very much like Moses when he goes and instead of speaking to the rock the second time, he hits it like he did the first time, because I've done this before and I know how it works. What God said doesn't really matter. I know what I'm doing. No, don't do that. Because what happened was I got about a quarter of the way through my fast, and I was curled up in a ball with the worst stomach cramps I've ever had in my life. And my husband, God bless him, was like, you're done. I'm calling it. You're eating a cheeseburger. So I finished my 40 days of social media fast, and I had to eat my pride on the classic fast that time. So, yeah. So don't fall into pride. Don't try to do something because you think you want to prove yourself that you can. Please excuse my children. But yeah. So I'm excited about this period of fasting that we're embarking on, because I think the Lord is going to do really cool stuff, and he always responds when we seek him earnestly. So thank you for those that are doing this with me, whether you're doing whatever kind of fast you're doing, and even for those of you that are called maybe not to the full 7 days but to a shorter period, thank you for doing this with me. I'm very excited about what the Lord's going to do and what we're going to see next week. I love you guys, and I'll see you probably Friday.